Katipunan. Radyo-katipunan. 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 Sa Blue Eagle kami di mapipigil sa pagbabalitang tumpak at tama. Buhay at tenista sa loob sa labas ng eskwela, ating ibibida lahat ng kwela. Kawal ni Ignacio, Katipunero, sugod, todo sa kayod, dunong at tulog. Lipat na Blue Eagle, galing giting nagigil. Blue and white, one big fight. Radyo-katipunan. Radyo-katipunan.
Radyo, 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 katipunan. Radyo, katipunan. Radyo, katipunan. Radyo, 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 katipunan. Radyo, katipunan. Voice of the Blue Eagle, kami di mapipigil sa pagbabalitang tumpak at tama. Buhay at tenista sa loob sa labas ng eskwela, ating ibibida lahat ng kwela. Radyo, katipunan. Radyo, katipunan. Radyo, katipunan. Kawal ni Ignacio, Katipunero, sugod, todo sa kayod, tunong at tulong. Lipat na Blue Eagle, galing giting at tigil. Blue and white, one big fight. Radyo, katipunan. Radyo, katipunan. Katipunan.
Baka naman pwede.
Baka naman pwede?
Baka naman pwede. Mga isyung napapanahon ating pag-usapan.
Baka naman pwede.
Gamit ang mga pananaw mula sa iba't ibang kalinangan.
Baka naman pwede.
Mula sa Institute of Philippine Culture, kami inyong samahan, tayo'y maghuntahan. Dito lang sa
Baka naman pwede.
Tuwing Huwebes, alas 3 ng hapon, dito lang sa Radyo Katipunan 87.9 FM.
Magandang hapon sa lahat. Nakikinig kayo ngayon sa Baka Naman Pwede, isang programa ng Institute of Philippine Culture at ng Radyo Katipunan na naglalayong pagnilayan ang mga napapanahong issue gamit ang lente ng agham panlipunan o social sciences. Nais din nating mapagkwentuhan ang mga bagay na baka naman pwedeng tingnan muli, pag-ukulan ng pansin at aksyonan. Ako po si Skilty Labastilla ng IPC. Last week, napag-usapan natin ang gampanin ng sining ng teatro sa panahon ng pandemic kasama sina Ricky Abad at Missy Maramara. Naging laman ng talakayan ang mga pagbabago sa pagtatanghal at paghahanda na ginagawa sa isang theatrical production, lalo na ng mga tauhan sa harap at likod ng palabas. Napag-usapan din kung paano nagiging daan ang teatro bilang salamin ng kasalukuyang karanasan ng mga manonood. Natalakay din ang mga alternatibong paraan sa patuloy na pagtuturo at pag-aaral ng teatro sa ating mga paaralan. Ngayon naman po, sa linggong ito, ang palabas natin ay pinamagatang Politics of Aesthetics, the graphic novel, and we will be joined by 3 faculty members of Ateneo who are teaching a college course with the same title, and we hope to learn more about how they came up with the course and what we can gain from having these conversations on politics and visual arts. Sa atin pong mga viewers sa Facebook, maaari kayong maging bahagi ng kwentuhan na ito. Feel free to leave comments and questions during the discussion at babasahin po namin ito sa ating Q&A portion. Alright, so ipapakilala ko na po ang ating mga panauhin ngayong hapon. Kasama natin sa hapong ito si Ginoong Roy Tristan Agustin ng English Department ng Ateneo de Manila University. Ang kanyang research interests ay cultural studies, specifically popular culture, speculative fiction, graphic fiction at social media. Magandang hapon, Sir Roy. Kasama rin natin ngayong hapon si Ginoong Antonio Rafael Elicano ng Department of Fine Arts. Mr. Elicano teaches a variety of electives with the Ateneo de Manila University Loyola Schools, mostly focusing on popular culture and media and cultural studies. He's a published fictionist, a former freelance writer, a teacher since 2015, and a comics fan since as far back as he can remember. Good afternoon, AJ.
Hi there. Hello.
All right. Lastly, with us today is Mr. Miguel Paolo Rivera from the Political Science Department. Si Migs ay isang instructor ng Ateneo de Manila University at ang kanyang research interest ay pumapaloob sa mga larangan ng teoryang pampolitika, estetika at demokratisasyon. 7 taon na siyang nagtuturo sa Ateneo. Hello Migs, good afternoon.
Magandang hapon sa iyo, Skilty, at sa lahat ng ating tagapakinig.
Alright. So simulan natin ang ating kwentuhan sa hapong ito sa kumustahan. No? Anong mga, alam ko, nagsisimula pa lang yung semestre sa Ateneo. Pero bukod sa, of course, paghahanda sa inyong mga klase, ano yung mga pinagkakaabalahan ninyong tatlo ngayong mga araw na ito? Simulan natin kay Sir Roy kasi alphabetical tayo.
Thank you. Well, actually, dahil ang dami kong klase this semester, most of the time is really nakalaan dun sa paghahanda at pagtuturo. Although, may konting panahon pa para magsulat, no, at mag-research ng konti kung may time. But, and partially also because of this class, naghahabol din ako sa pagbabasa ng comics.
That's nice. All right, thanks. AJ, what are you busy with?
Mostly the same, setting up for class, reading what comics I can, and when I have time, I run a couple of Dungeons and Dragons games.
Nice. Migs.
Well, ganun din, di ba? Lahat naman tayo, unang 2 linggo, 3 linggo na ba, ewan ko ba, ng klase. May ilan pa akong ginagawa para sa ating institusyon na hindi ko pa maaaring ibunyag. Pero sa tingin ko, mapag-uusapan natin siya sa mga susunod na linggo.
Nice, nice. All right. So, very interesting, no? Yung topic natin ngayong hapon kasi kayong tatlo ay nagtuturo ng iisang kurso, no? Ito ngang Politics of Aesthetics. Tama ba yung tama, no? Politics of Aesthetics, the graphic novel. Actually, una ko tong nakita. I'm not sure kung 2 years ago. Kailan ba to nagsimula, Migs, yung course na to? Was it 1 year old na ba to or 2 years old?
Oh, it's older. Mas matagal pa. Siguro 2016, 17?
I see. Okay.
Nung nagsimula yung kurso.
17.
Under what department?
Poli-sci department siya lagi.
I see. Okay. And then, it was offered as an interdisciplinary elective. What year?
Right out of the gate. Yeah. Hindi, ang alam ko right out of the gate, di ba?
IE na agad siya.
Well,
IE na agad siya.
Hindi pa pala kasi wala pa IE system.
Wala pang IE nun eh.
Yeah.
Pero isa siya sa mga pinakaunang IE. Dati sa Poli-sci lang as an elective. Pero ang intention talaga nung dinisenyo namin yung kurso ay interdisciplinary course na siya talaga dapat kaagad. Pero dahil hindi pa nabubuo yung sistema nun, elective muna, tapos ngayon interdisciplinary elective na siya.
Nice. So sinong paano to na-initiate? Sinong unang nakaisip na
Okay, ito na yung kwento na. Sige. Hindi ko muna babanggitin yung mas seryosong konteksto pero ang talagang punot dulo ng kursong to, nakita ko lang si Sir Roy sa labas ng De La Costa Hall. 'Di ba dati noon may tindahan ng mga libro.
Yes.
Nung panahon 'yon, parang kung mahilig ka naman sa comics, malalaman mo kung sino sa faculty yung mahilig din sa comics. So alam ko yun kita ko na tumitingin siya ng comics, sabi ko, Sir Roy, wala mong kurso sa Ateneo tungkol sa comics. Meron daw sa fine arts ganyan, pero sabi ko, hindi, yung talaga nag-analyze, wala. Sabi ko, tara, magturo tayo. Sabi niya, sige, tara bumuo tayo ng kurso. Maganda siguro kung merong magtuturo sa mga bata, mag-drawing din. Kaya paano gumawa ng comic. So nung hapon din yun, dumiretso ako sa Fine Arts Department, tapos nandun si AJ.
As in, I was behind the divider. I overheard Migs talking about the comics course, and my head kind of poked out like a cartoon. I was like, hi, I can do this.
Yeah, yun na. Ganun lang kasimple actually yung simula ng kurso.
So ito yung 2016? Tama
Yes.
ba? 2016?
Mga ganun. Tapos nag-meet kami in the Poly-Sci depth for like 4 hours or something.
Yeah,
Fleshing
a
it out.
while.
Parang ganun.
Okay. And then gaano kahaba yung did you have to apply for this sa curriculum committee?
Yes,
Oo.
definitely.
Yes.
Yeah.
We were so over-prepared, I think. We even brought samples of comic books, right? Remember that? When we were facing the panel. Kasi we thought they would sort of... Kasi ang parte ng issue na tinatalakay namin with the course sa kurso sa isip ng maraming akademiko, hindi seryosong medium ang comics. Kaya hindi namin alam kung anong shape nung committee. Kaya nung pinopropose sa aming kurso, nagdala pa kami ng mga comics na sa tingin namin magkukumbinsi sa mga tao na isang seryosong uri ng sining ang paggawa ng comics. Pero hindi naman nangyari yun. Malakas naman ang interest ng mga colleagues natin at na-approve naman yung kurso.
Nice.
Oo.
So yung process na yon, since yung naisip nyo na i-offer as a course, did it take several months or a few weeks lang?
Di ba SEM?
Approval?
Roughly?
Yeah, Sem.
Yes, sir.
Ito ka SEM.
Yeah.
Pero yung mismong pagbuo, hindi. Kasi parang sa pagitan naming tatlo, marami na kaming nabasang comics So,
Yeah.
Okay.
at ang maganda pa riyan, iba't ibang uri ng comics ang binabasa naming tatlo. Parang ako, naiiba minsan yung mga binabasa ko sa binabasa ni Roy at ni AJ. Iba rin yung binabasa nila sa akin, di ba?
So, ang nangyayari doon, ang lawak nung scope nung
Okay.
nako-cover namin within the three of us.
So anong example ng differences in your consumption of comics? Like anong focus ni AJ versus Roy and Migs?
Legs ka muna.
Yes.
Ako, ito na, maririnig na ng mga tao. Hindi ako ganun kahilig sa mga superhero comics.
Okay.
Kaya sa mga mas dark comedy, indie, even non-fiction graphic novels, yun ang mga binabasa ko. Hindi ako masyadong mahilig sa mga Marvel, DC, mga gano'n.
Alright. Anong example nun, Migs? Yung mga nabanggit?
Marami. Halimbawa, mga comics patungkol sa Great War or mga slice of life tulad ng mga experiences ng immigration. Okay. Hindi ako mag-name na lang ng titles. Marami kasi, no? Pero, o kaya, yung iba naman, very purely artistic, halos. Napakaganda lang yan na comic. Pero, sige, magkwento ko ng isa. Siguro, paborito ko. Para rin may ma-recommend ako sa mga tagapakinig natin. Yung Jimmy Corrigan versus the World ni Chris Ware, Ware. Isa siya sa mga paboritong comic book. Okay. Tungkol siya sa isang autistic na middle-aged man At maganda yung comic dahil sa pagbabasa mismo ng comic book na yon, hindi siya yung ordinaryong panel lang na sunod-sunod. No? Parte ng intensyon ng disenyo ng comic, parang iparamdam rin sa isip mo kung ano ba yung pinagdadaanan nilang proseso ng pag-iisip. So minsan, ang daming panel na pare-pareho yung teksto, pero iba-iba yung konteksto, o kaya paikot yung kailangang pagbasa, at marami pang iba, no? So yung mga ganong klase, mas experimental yung mas mga binabasa ko.
Thanks. Thanks, Migs. Si AJ naman, anong klaseng comic books yung binabasa?
I'll just get the big one out of the way first. I'm an enormous X-Men fan. I cannot shut up about the X-Men. But also, like, in terms of the superhero stuff, I think Roy and I tend to read different superheroes.
Okay.
And then I also read like a lot of the Image Comics things. There are particular like creators that I follow who are, I think, sort of in the space that isn't quite as experimental or like out there as some of the things that Migs has talked about, but certainly the more like creator-driven work versus like big do stuff. I'm a big fan of East of West by Jonathan Hickman. Anything Kieran Gillen writes, I tend to like. I'm trying to branch out.
Thanks, AJ. Roy, kumusta naman yung selection mo of comic books?
Ako kasi yung matanda dito sa group. So, I've literally been reading comics since the 1980s.
Okay.
And so, alam mo yung, I started obviously with sila Superman and Batman and all of this. But that gives me a point of view. I have a historical point of view of it, na from where it came from to where it is now. In terms of what I read, I'm very eclectic. I read a lot of stuff. Also partially because I have friends who are comic book creators, and they kind of pass stuff over to me. So I read anything really. But recently, the stuff that I've enjoyed reading includes a local comic called Ella Arcangel, which is this. It's interesting because sikat si 13, right? By the way, Budget Tan is a batchmate of mine, so I am very proud of him because of that. He's been struggling with comics since literally we were teenagers. Tapos, Ella is a different one because instead of the normal middle class setting, Ella is in a very poor community and she's very poor. Pero mambabarang siya. And so there's this on one hand, diba, meron ka mga aswang at pinalaban ng mga ganong klaseng panganib, pero at the same time, yung bahay mo baka ma-demolish. May ganong klaseng dynamic din sa story, which I love, no? That's one. And then another local work is a guy named Rob Cham, who teaches sometimes in Ateneo. And he made a series of, di ko alam kung comic siya because they're illustrated books called Lost, and then the second one is Light. And very beautiful books, they're full color. And it's just about a journey of a person through different things. You can take it as a metaphor, you can take it literally, but nag-journey lang yung tao through very, very beautifully done panels. So yun so far. And then of course, I have to read all these things for the class. So, yeah.
All right. So nakita natin yung pagkakaiba no ng interest at hilig sa different types of comics. Isang nakita kong challenge in designing the syllabus. Paano nyo na-structure yung syllabus na lalabas pa rin yung parang expertise nyo kumbaga sa comics. Ano yung main elements of the course?
That's a good thing.
Sige, ako mauna.
Go.
Isa sa mga misconceptions on comics, or baka diretsuin ko na lang yung sagot na hindi ganun kahirap bumuo ng syllabus na nakapalibot sa comics dahil yung mga topics at dialogue, pati yung mga art na makikita mo sa comics, lalo na ngayon, very overtly political.
Yes.
No? So we had our pick of whichever topic we wanted to do. No? Tapos, actually, mas nahirapan pa kami sa kung ano yung academic readings na ipapabasa kesa dun sa comics kasi ang dami talaga. Kailangan namin magputol, no? Di ba, Roy at AJ? Yeah.
So, ano yung balance ng comics na kailangan basahin ng students at saka yung academic readings? Is it 50-50 or 70-30? Ano yung mas maraming babasahin nila?
Definitely mas maraming comics.
Yeah.
Comics, okay.
Definitely. Kasi hindi madali yung readings namin for the course.
Right.
Yep.
We're using, we only have, I think, isa lang yata yung superhero comic natin, no? In the course.
Like 1.5.
So most of the work,
Okay.
and usually we use like full graphic novels. Most of the work is not light reading. You know? So like I don't know if you've heard of the comic book named Mouse.
Oh wow.
MAUS?
MAUS.
Yes.
Very recently binan siya sa Tennessee.
Yeah,
Right?
I've heard about it.
So we use Mouse. We use Mouse, and it's not easy reading. So we do need to give them the time to kind of, aside from read it, no, yung process.
Right.
Kasi like some things deal with trauma, some things deal with heavy topics. No, and then we relate it to the political aspect of it.
Right. Kumusta yung evolution ng course from 2016 until now? Kasi, di ba, of course, with the online thing, may mga changes required of us. Ano yung kinailangan yung baguhin from the way it started to now?
We started, if I remember right, the first time we taught it was intercession, di ba?
No, we taught it in a regular sem as like a beta test, and then
Yeah.
from then on it was intercession.
So we were actually very accustomed to teaching it in 5 weeks.
Yep.
Which is really,
Okay.
which is
Which-
really tight.
It's
Yeah.
very tough.
So kawawa yung students kasi gagawa ka ng comics in 5 weeks.
Yep.
So it's a very tight thing. So we were actually very happy na binigay this time a full sem,
Yeah.
right?
Okay.
So we have a little more time.
Yeah,
But-
that's one change. Yeah.
At
Kasi-
saka we're very consultation heavy.
Yeah.
Yeah. And
Um,
also one thing I'd like to point out, throughout the years, we've had a lot of demand from students to feature more Asian and Filipino works
Yes.
into the course, which we've done, I think, from the
Nag-adjust
Japanese,
kami.
the Koreans, nag-adjust kami. Ang problema nga lang kasi sa ganong larangan, iba-iba talaga yung approaches eh.
Yeah.
So, gustuhin man namin, ang dami talagang pwedeng pag-usapan.
Right.
Like manga pa lang ng Japanese halimbawa, parang pang isang sem na eh.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
Oo. Online medyo paano ba?
Yung huling intercession natin.
Medyo sa ngayon, pero yung kasi nung last time naming tinuro to, transition pa from on-site to
Yes.
online eh. Ngayon yung una naming beses na ituturo siya online
Na full sem.
na full sem.
In a full sem with the current online learning practices and
Alright.
Yeah. So, ewan ko, AJ, may expectation ba tayo na magbago sa comic production?
I mean, one thing, before I get to the production side of it, one consideration that we've always had with the evolution of the syllabus is that we're not designed to be an introductory class to comics, but
Okay.
we have to assume that we may be someone's introduction to comics.
Right.
It's a thing that you always have, I think, when you teach like a pop culture elective of any kind. Like I also co-teach the science fiction class. We're not supposed to be an intro class, but we might have to be. So the evolution of our readings has always been like, how do we, on the one hand, have readings that talk about particular topics, particular modes of politics, ways of reading, but are also like a diverse sampler of what comics are like in general. So the readings have always shifted, but that's always kind of been the goal.
Okay.
In terms of like production, I don't think anything's changed. It's just we have more time now.
Yeah, yeah. So you mentioned production. Siguro, let's talk about the requirements of the course. No? So, of course, students are expected to read the comics. But what else are they supposed to do?
Survive.
Yes, exactly that. So the way the course operates is that the requirements are all meant to be working towards producing a comic at the end of the sem.
Okay.
And by that I mean like you begin with kind of concept paper stuff, and then you do a pitch, and then you write a storyboard, and you do a storyboard, you make a script, and the idea is that this is all working towards a short final comic at the end of the sem.
All right. Tapos, yes,
sorry.
go ahead, Roy.
So normally it's very consultative. So
Yeah.
at every major step, they show it to us. We go through, we
Give
talk it over
feedback.
with them, and we give feedback. So it's a
So-
very consultative process.
When you provide feedback, can it be individual consultation with each of you, or kailangan kayong tatlo nandun?
It generally the standard thing is we all give feedback on each stage of the process. If people want to get more feedback with any combination of us, they can do
Okay.
that.
All right. Ilang percent yung yung creative output na yun, if I can call it that?
The
The
God.
comic book that they have to make.
the final
Comic,
one,
yeah.
we just
bilis.
debated percentages. Oh God.
A lot of it is the final comic, about 40%,
All right.
right? But the thing is, a lot of the steps that they have to take, which would be their concept note, their pitches, and also their initial drafts, for example, are also graded.
That's the
So
other 60.
those that comprises the other 60%. So essentially, the steps taken are graded, and then the final output is graded as a singular piece of work. No.
Yeah.
So
I'm asking kasi inisip ko kung ako yung kasi I'm kung ako inisip ko estudyante ako tapos very interested ako to take the course, but I can't draw if to save my life. So kung ganon, may mga ganon ba kayong students na like stick figures but really interested in
Surprisingly, siguro what,
the three of
80% of our students can't draw.
The three
Alright.
of us can't draw.
That's good to know.
Neither can we.
Okay.
So the thing that we always kind of emphasize at the start of the sem is that while the requirements are geared towards producing a creative output, it's not a production class. We're not grading people on craft.
All right.
The idea of the course, from like a broad perspective, is that the aesthetic decisions you make when you are creating a work of visual narrative can contribute to the message you're trying to forward, the discourse you're trying to introduce, the conversation you're trying to have. It's not about how well you do it necessarily. But also, in addition, like on the one hand, we have that, but also one thing that we've tried to do for years now is whenever possible, I try to connect with Blink, Blue Indie Comics, their student org that does comics in Ateneo. And I have them come in to just give like a drawing workshop for any of our students who are interested. Because like, I know what it's like to be a student in a comics class who doesn't know how to draw. I have been that person.
Yeah.
So while we do assure our students that you don't have to know how to draw to get an A in the class, we do make sure that like if you want a drawing workshop, there will be one for you.
Okay. That's really reassuring. Sige. We're talking about the specifics of the course. Siguro ano muna tayo from a broader perspective. Obviously, you have a great interest in graphic novels, but what is it about comics that you feel is important to talk about? Now, why is it worth a semester of your life in Ateneo?
Sa amin, lifestyle yan. But
It's
but
not one sem, it's years.
no, but I think as sinabi ni Migs kanina, it's a very it's a medium that allows for so much possibility. And especially now, no, after let's say, like I think siguro what 90s to the early 2000s to the 2000s, more and more people have been taking advantage of the medium to say more and more things.
Right.
And it's it is a medium that is enjoying a lot of growth in terms of people exploring and finding out what they can say. That's one. The other one is it's an accessible medium. Di ba? You pick up a comic and it's very innocuous. It's not really dangerous. You're not going to get intimidated by it. And then you read it, and sometimes your mind gets blown by what's being said. So that's kind of the reason, one of the reasons why we thought it was worth a SEM.
Any other additions, Migs or AJ?
I'd latch on to that accessibility, di ba? Most of us in Ateneo know, the mainstream comic books. And sabi nga ni Roy, ang daming expressions. But also, I'd like to highlight, comic books have been used as a medium for disseminating information in, for example, our elections for a long time. So understanding that medium is not just a purely, a choice that's purely for entertainment purposes. It's actually being deployed in our society to disseminate political information, right? And understanding how it's made, what kind of messages it can convey, will enable our students to explore what other forms of political expressions there are in our society. Yeah.
Right. AJ.
And I think, like, just to jump off that, one thing is that fascinates me as as a fine arts guy is that when you read a comic, it's a very particular type of reading that you're doing, a type of literacy. Text and image are part of the same narrative, and that is, on the one hand, it sounds very trippy because you talk about reading images, you talk about writing art, but on the other hand, that's also just the type of literacy that we engage whenever we are on social media. Constantly, that navigation of text and image, and comics at least are a form where this is used deliberately. Is one thing. The other thing I think is that, for better or for worse, the products of comics are largely dominating Western pop culture. The Marvel Cinematic Universe are the biggest movies in the world. And if that's the sphere that we're in, I think it's important for people to be able to navigate the territory that comes with it. And finally, I think it's fun, and that's not to be dismissive of it. I think that so many people are doing like armchair pop culture critique because we are, a society that talks about the pop culture that we consume. And I think the willingness to be critical of the things that we enjoy is important.
Right. I agree. No, I also teach an IE course called Representation of Otherness in Film and Literature, and for the literature part, I actually assign comics made by Filipinos. I'm sure you're familiar with Dead Balagtas' work, Emiliana Campilan, some other comics from Gantala Press, and students are really receptive, to the messages of those kinds of really progressive works, and works made by queer authors, queer writers, non-mainstream authors. So I agree with everything that you said. Ang isa kong naisip, gaano ka, although sinabi ni Migs kanina na hindi ganon kahirap mag-design ng syllabus kasi very obvious nga yung messages. But in terms of contextualizing the works of these different comics from around the world, how do you do that? Kasi when you talk about, for example, Dead Balagtas, it's very specific to the Filipino queer perspective. But how deep do you get into a text, and how far back do you go when you try to compare different comics from different contexts?
Mahirap yun ah.
Oh, mahirap yung tanong.
I mean, the cop-out answer is it depends on the comic. But like, we want to give you more than that.
Pero sa tingin ko, when it comes to reading or contextualizing comics, one thing about our course is that yung binanggit ni AJ kanina, a lot of comic book culture is so ubiquitous today
Yeah.
that when students enter our courses, they tend to have a lot of ideas, or if you'd like to call them misconceptions, about where the medium is, right? So, very Atenean answer, we begin where students are in terms of what do they know. Usually it's from the movies, or they've only really dabbled with it a little bit more. So, in terms of exploring, let's say, or rather, it's much simpler now to make that jump na, hey, there are these other works that actually explore deeper questions, for example, or that sort of turn around the usual tropes of mainstream stuff. So, for example, right, when we talk about queerness, AJ would be able to discuss this much more in depth, but in terms of queerness, there's been a lot of movement, I think, in the medium to sort of turn it on its head, right? Kasi comics notorious yan for like being really the
Misogyny.
one of the prime mediums for misogyny sort of depictions of women,
Right.
or stereotypical depictions of sexuality.
Yeah.
Halimbawa. Pero now, itatag team ko na si AJ, nagbabago na yan, di ba? Tama ba, AJ?
Yeah, and that's multiple things, right? On the one hand, there's the big two, like the big corporate comics like Marvel and DC, becoming more open to that. They have regular Pride anthologies now, and whether you think that is like genuine progressiveness or just like a cynical cash grab, it's more open than it has been before. There are characters historically who were like big mainstream characters who are queer now textually. Black Cat is textually bisexual now. Iceman textually gay. So there's more of that. But also because of just the increasing push for like more indie comics, more creator-owned comics, a lot of writers are like more able, I think, to express these things without fear that some big corporation is going to censor them, let's say. And so it's important, I think, that, like, for example, when we talk about like queer superheroes or queer characters, that is something that we talk about. And then to jump off what Migs pointed out about like subversion of tropes, one thing I really like in our course is that even when we do like talk about superheroes, because I feel like you can't have a comics course that ignores superheroes. Like, it shouldn't necessarily be all about it, but you can't ignore them. They're just so pivotal to the genre. But we try to get the superhero comics that interrogate what it means to be a superhero. House of X, Powers of 10 is kind of the recent X-Men reboot, and it's very much kind of interrogating the notion that if the marginalized are superheroes, they'll be accepted. It's a whole comic that challenges that,
Right.
in ways that I think are cool.
Thanks, AJ.
I think
Right.
just adding to it, but the other challenge kasi with, di ba, the diversity and the volume of works in comics is curation. So,
Yeah.
which is why it's very good that there's three of us and that we read three different kinds of comics. It speeds up the act of curation, because otherwise, if it's one guy, it's one person reading literally probably hundreds of comics, right? And then masisira ulo mo just trying to prep for class.
Right.
So the fact that there's three of us and we already have built-in inventories of stories and comics that we've read in our heads makes it faster to say, oh, this is the topic or this is the theme. What can we use to apply or to demonstrate it? And usually what happens is it's like something AJ read, he'll tell us. And then normally he'll share the comic, so we'll read it and like, oh, okay. So
Yep.
that's kind of the process also.
Half of our like Facebook chat thread is just us recommending comics to each other. Like, hey, this will be good for the class.
Yeah, I'm sure. I have a very teacher question. First of all, ilang students do you usually get in a set?
Alam mo, parte, natatawa kami kasi nung mga unang beses naming tinuturo yung kurso, minsan nagmamakaawa pa kami sa mga estudyante.
Yeah.
Yup.
Please sign up, please. But we started as a small class of really just about
12.
18, 14 students.
We had 1 year we were 10.
Yeah. No?
Okay.
Pero now, this sem, we're teaching about 62, 64.
2 classes.
Yes, 2 classes. Yeah.
Right. And kasi pag inisip ko kung tatlong faculty handling the course, ano yung pros and cons of having the 3 of you? Kasi so far positive yung naririnig ko you feed off each other's expertise and energy. But ano yung challenges and how do you overcome those?
It's like we're a three-headed monster.
We are.
So,
we really are.
when we, because usually the way it works is we usually designate days, or let's say I have the floor or AJ has the
Okay.
floor or Nick
Yeah.
has the floor. And really, dapat yun, the other two don't have to come,
All right.
right? They don't have to show up. But we always do.
We always do.
So what happens there is you'll have someone on the floor and then the two are at the back doing chuwari-wari-wap stuff. So it is a three-headed monster that I kind of am afraid sometimes that students have to deal with.
Yes.
It's never one person that they're talking to, it's always three.
Yeah.
So yun yung nakatakutan ko minsan.
Yep. And then I think like another, I wouldn't call it a con, but a thing that is a challenge when setting the course up is that, as Roy points out, we do have to like assign days to each other, and the challenge is that we have to, because if we don't kind of choreograph it, like Migs and Roy know this, I have like an obsessive Google calendar that's like on this day it's Migs, on this day it's and part of that is because part of the unique character of the three-headed monster is that we have different areas of the course that we kind of assume primary responsibility over. The political science texts are obviously kind of more of a Migs thing.
Okay.
The workshops and production stuff are more of a me thing. So while we all give feedback and contribute to everything where we can, like if it's a pulsi reading, that's Migs. If it's a workshop, it's me. And what that means, like the way that I try to explain it to our students this sem, I don't know if it worked or if it helped or if it just scared them more, is that depending on like which of us you're facing or like which part of the course it is, we are either your political theory class or your comic book club, or we are your editorial board and you are a creative teams pitching to us. And part of the challenge, I think, sorry, go ahead.
No, go finish, please.
Oh, part of the challenge, but it's one that I've come to relish, is that sometimes the things that each head of the monster will want are different things.
Right.
Because like as the production person, like there are certain deadlines that I think are important to meet, because if we cram them, it'll be harder for them to make the final comic. And that might bump up against the need of Migs or Roy to have 2 days covering a particular reading. So it's just navigating challenges like that. That makes it not bad, but that makes it tough occasionally. But I think it makes it a better course when we resolve it. That's what I think.
So in terms of assessment, how do you do that? Do you divide the class into 3 and just focus on your assigned students? Or is it like really all 3 of you giving a grade to an output?
It's really all 3 of us.
It's
Hanggang
all
sa
three.
grading three-headed monster kami.
Okay.
Yep.
We sit down, the few of us, we look at each comic, and then we sort of like, parang panel discussion. So parang nga kaming editors, no? Parang, okay, what did you like, what did you not like, what grade do you think this looks like, so on and so forth.
It's really interesting because I think when the Office of the Associate Dean for Core Curriculum designed the interdisciplinary elective, that students, all Ateneo students will take. I think it's something like this. Na parang it's really interdisciplinary, coming from different disciplines and departments, coming together to teach a course. Although of course, pwede namang ibang modalities, like one person having expertise in different disciplines. But it's interesting, no, na ganito yung magiging itsura ng isang IE course with 3 faculty members coming from different disciplines handling the course. Wala lang, comment ko lang yun. Kasi so far sa amin, hindi pa kami umaabot sa ganito na faculty members coming from different departments teaching an IE course. No? So far sa amin, because we're an interdisciplinary studies department, ang expectation is we are interdisciplinary already as individual faculty. But siguro, last question before we go to the Q&A. No? Paano natin or siguro in your experience, how do you sort of encourage interdisciplinary approaches to learning about art or literature, about politics? Kasi itong tatlong to, pinag-uusapan sa kurso ninyo, pero paano kaya to ma-imbibe ng public, ng general public, yung ganitong klaseng interdisciplinary thinking?
I think partially it has to be openness, right? The reason why the 3 of us work together is we were open to each other to begin with. Nobody was, there was no ego involved na, oh, I'm smarter than you, I know more about this subject than you, etc., etc. It was really a recognition that we each had something to bring, and we all kind of laid it on the table and said, oh, this is what we have, how do we work together on it? And it was really that. It's been very refreshing to work with Migs and AJ because it's really collaboration. There is no ego na I am doing this and this is my part of it. Walang ganon. So that's partially why we're a 3-headed monster, because we also, when somebody is at the floor and the student asks a question, we support each other as well. So I think that's a very big thing about it. But you have to be open. So if you're working with another teacher, you have to be open to that person, and that person vice versa. So it has to be open.
Other thoughts from Migs?
Ako siguro, medyo curious yung topic politics, aesthetics, no? At ang maling assumption ngayon ng karamihan sa mga mamamayan natin, or hindi lang ng mga mamamayan natin, ng maraming tao, inaccessible yung mga larangan na ito sa kanila. Okay? Perennial problem yan na Philippine politics, yung inaccessibility ng ating democratic institutions sa halimbawa. Parang may mirror yon sa preconceived notion that only a few people can really be artistic or creative. Right? We want to, part of the design of the course and the intention of the course is to tell people that's not true. Right? You can be creative in your own way. You can participate in political discourses in your own way. Right? So when you put that together, that kind of messaging, you're really looking at a lot of these engagements, and we're telling really our students that, there's not any one approach to politicization. There's really not one approach to creation, right? So it's a very creative process, no? Kahit na ako, sabi nga namin, kaming tatlo, hindi naman kami nagdo-drawing.
Yeah.
No? Pero yun yung laging tanong sa amin, uy, comics course, hindi ako marunong mag-drawing. Yun yung una naming binubuwag. So, after nun, pwede mo nang buwagin yung mga conception na pang elite lang ang politika, o ang mga comic ngayon, puro stereotype lang ang laman, or mababaw ang pinag-uusapan. So, sunod-sunod na yung natatakil doon, no? Pagdating sa mga tanong ng kurso.
I really like that point. So far wala pang questions, no, from viewers, pero may naisip akong isang tanong tungkol naman sa student feedback. So far, ano yung pinaka-common na naririnig nyo from students after taking the course?
Kulang daw yung comics.
Yep. It's the paradox of like there's too many readings, but they also want more comics.
Yeah, I think I understand that, no? Na parang not enough time really. Ang gusto nilang sabihin. Gusto nilang mag-consume pa, but not enough time.
But that's the thing, we gave them long works. Mahaba yung binabasa
Yeah,
nila.
it's
Pero
the other
sasabihin nila,
thing.
bitin sila.
Right. Ano yung mga nakuha nyong feedback from the first few years of teaching na adapt nyo, na incorporate nyo sa current design ng course?
One
think
is more Filipino comic book makers and or at the very least Asian ones, pero more Filipino ones.
Right.
So we have a lot more Filipino authors featured in the syllabus than before. That's one I can name. I don't know what Roy was going to say.
Yeah.
Yun din ba, Roy?
Oh, I mean, and one problem we had kasi at the start was walang available.
Yeah,
Because
that we could make available.
Yeah, that we could share. A lot of like, we really wanted to use jescom.ph the first years, remember?
Yeah.
And there were no copies. So even if we had them go out, walang mahanap. So ngayon meron na ulit. Right? But that's an example of things, no? So
how do you now in the online setup, if you assign a comic, do you ask them to buy this or do you provide copies of these comics? Paano ano nito?
Mahirap na tanong yan, Skilty.
Yeah, I know. Because
Nahihirapan.
Sorry.
AJ, well, nahihirapan akong sagutin yung tanong. Pero for a lot of local comics, we tell them to go and buy it. No?
Yeah.
I think wherever it is accessible, we do
Right.
tell people to go out and then get stuff.
Right. I understand, no? Kasi even sa class ko, when I asked them to read a chapter of, tawag dito, Dead Balagtas, I had to scan a chapter of Dead Balagtas from the library. At tapos in-upload ko sa Canvas as a PDF file. So parang gano'n, no? I'm sure may mga some issues there with copyright, but as teachers we can only do so much. No? We want them to be exposed to these works, but with this kind of setup, parang kailangan pag-usapan kung paano pinakamaiging gawin.
yan yung mahirap talaga about it, the access that you can
Right.
give. So we're happy nga now that at least for Filipino comics, there are more digital copies available and they're not expensive.
Yeah.
So at least madaling makuha.
Yeah.
Otherwise kasi you're stuck with, doing other ways of getting these copies. And the other thing is, I think for some of the comics we share, they're not in print anymore. So nangyayari doon personal copies,
Yeah.
right? But for some of them, they just don't exist. You can't buy them anymore. So we have to resort to those things also.
There's a question here about possible misconceptions or ano pa yung ibang mga misconceptions about comics or politics or literature that you aim to tackle in your course or parang na come across nyo in handling the course?
That is a huge question.
Ang hirap, no? That comics has to be pretty. This one, I think.
Okay.
Comics don't have to be pretty.
Right.
I just think that there's only one way that comics operate.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's one of the bigger ones, I think. Usually when people think of comic books, yun nga, in the more mainstream stuff, but like in terms of layouting of panels or the kind of art that you can see in modern comic books today, they're really pushing the medium like to new heights, no? A Another is that, paano ba? That we're both sort of tackling with this question of, are they easy to make or are they difficult to make? Right? We're always moving between those two sort of kasi whenever we explain the elements of comic books to our students, they kind of get overwhelmed kasi ang dami palang pinag-iisipan.
There's so many terms.
Ang daming terms, pati pala yung
Psychology.
yung psychology, yung shape ng bubble, or ano yung first panel mo, last panel mo. Pero also, it's quite an intuitive process also, right? And that's something that surprises a lot of our students as well, that they can actually make it.
Yeah.
Ano ba mga misconceptions?
I have one.
Yeah.
That the only options are that something is overtly political or that it is not at all political.
Okay.
Yeah. So some people, especially when they do their first pitches, it's so on the nose that it's not going to make good reading.
Yeah.
So we kind of have to tell them you kind of have to use the comic book medium better.
And
right?
yes, it's a cliche, but everything is political and also everything is art. The telling a political story isn't necessarily just about the big issue. It's recognizing the politics that are already in the story you want to tell.
Yeah. Really interesting. Unfortunately, napasarap tayo sa kwentuhan. Tapos na yung oras natin, no? I personally would really like to sit in this class. I have a confession to make, actually. When I told you earlier that I saw, I read, come across this course, I saw the poster in Facebook. And then, sabi ko, bakit sa yung course ko walang poster? Bakit itong course nila may poster? So gumawa ako ng sarili kong poster and sarili kong IE.
Nice.
And, so you inspired me to be more accessible to the wider public.
No. Thank the year where we had 10 students and I was like, never again. People will know.
Right. So thanks so much to our guests, Sir Roy, Sir AJ, and Sir Migs for gracing us this afternoon. Dami kong natutunan, no? And hopefully the listeners as well. Bago tayo umalis, hihingi tayo ng pabaon, no? Last words from each of our guests. Please give your recommendations or your message for our viewers regarding what we can do to support interdisciplinary work or even itong comics industry or discussions about politics or art. Anong pwede niyong pabaon sa listeners natin today about what we've just talked about? So siguro, just finish the sentence, baka naman pwedeng in your own way. We'll start with Roy.
Ang hirap niya na. Baka naman pwedeng mas maraming gumawa at mas maraming magbasa ng comics. Especially Philippine-made ones. Yeah.
Thanks, Roy. AJ.
Great, because I was worried that Migs would take mine. Just mas maraming IEs. Just more academic work on pop culture and things people enjoy.
Migs.
Sa akin, baka naman pwedeng matanto na natin na maraming paraan upang maging mapanlikha tungkol sa politika natin. No? Yun.
Really nice. Alright, dito po nagtatapos ang Baka Naman Pwede. Maraming salamat muli sa ating guests, Mr. Roy Agustin, Mr. AJ Elicano, at Mr. Migs Rivera. Baka naman may gusto kayong idagdag o batiin, although yun nga, paubos na yung oras natin, but siguro we would like to give a shout out then to the Ateneo Office of Associate Dean for Core Curriculum for giving space to courses like this to become IEs to be taken by more students in Ateneo. Next week po, samahan ninyo ulit kami sa aming bagong episode ukol sa love and romance in Pinoy pop culture in time for Valentine's. Baka naman pwedeng i-like nyo rin ang IPC sa Facebook para sa iba pa naming announcements at events. Until next time, ako po si Skilty Labastilla. Mag-iingat po kayo at laging tandaan, kung may gustong maunawaan, baka naman pwedeng pag-usapan.
Baka naman pwede.
Baka naman pwede?
Baka naman pwede.
Mga isyung napapanahon, ating pag-usapan.
Baka naman pwede.
Gamit ang mga pananaw mula sa iba't ibang kalinangan.
Baka naman pwede.
Mula sa Institute of Philippine Culture, kami inyong samahan, tayo'y maghuntahan. Dito lang sa
Baka naman pwede.
tuwing Huwebes, alas 3 ng hapon, dito lang sa Radyo Katipunan 87.9 FM.